Hey everybody, welcome back to the Preacher Boys podcast. My name is Eric Skwarczynski, and I'm a former member of an independent fundamental Baptist church. And as a former fundamentalist, I'm now shedding light on the dark side of the church, from the pulpit to the pew. Today, I'm joined once again by guest Hannah St. George, who many of you will remember from two previous episodes where she shared both her story of surviving abuse within a deeply religious family to a network of horrifying abuses connected to Bible Baptist Church in Fairbanks, Alaska. In today's conversation, we're discussing the latest developments in a case against her mother, Vicki Leak, who's currently facing 13 felony charges related to child abuse. As of now, Vicki's pretrial hearing is scheduled for August 11th, and I'll make sure to share any updates as soon as they become available. If you haven't heard Hannah's previous two episodes, I've linked them in the show notes of this episode, and I highly encourage that you listen to them before checking out this conversation. But either way, there's something here you can pull from the discussion. Thank you so much for listening. Let's go ahead and dive into my conversation with Hannah St. George. So in our first conversation, we spent a good portion of our time talking about the church and talking about like the high control of the church. We talked about like the way that it kind of glossed over really horrible things that were happening that the church could have easily stepped in and done something about. We spent our second episode talking about how it manifested with numerous abuse cases tied to the church and really ended the conversation talking about something that hits really close to home, specifically with your mom now facing some very serious charges. Before we go back to the beginning of that story, can you just inform the audience where your mom's case is currently? Like what's happening with it right now?
So right now, the last that I've heard is just kind of what's public knowledge, and that's she has a criminal trial coming up in August. She got arrested in March, I think it was 2022. So it was over 3 years ago now. She was immediately bailed out by Bible Baptist Church and served less than 24 hours in jail. And she's been on house arrest on an ankle monitor ever since then. So from what I've seen, their attorneys are dragging on the case, and I don't know what their approach is. If it's just, the longer that time goes by, the more that the kids will forget, or I have no idea what their thoughts are, but they've continued to drag it on and drag it on. So I don't know if the trial will actually be happening in August, but that's kind of, what's on the calendar right now, the court calendar. The last hearing that I heard anything about was probably close to a year ago, and they were asking for more time because they wanted to hire an expert witness to delve into all of my records, all of my medical records, all of my mental health records. They wanted access to everything because, from what I'm told, it was like a fishing expedition. Their approach to covering up the truth is to blame me. My parents say that due to a head injury that I got from a car accident in 2016, they're saying that I made up everything, that I convinced all these kids that they were abused, that I somehow got in the heads of all the professionals, law enforcement, and made up a story because I'm angry and bitter at the church and at my parents. That's what they believe. And so they really want to try to convince people of that dialogue. And so they wanted access to everything personal of mine so they could try to fish for whatever is going to try to spin their narrative the way they want it. So thankfully the judge denied that, but it definitely felt like insult to injury when that happened. When I read the report, I read my father and mother's attorney put out just this huge 3-page document to the court on what they believe is happening. They wanted to delve into all the lives of all the grand jury that instated the charges back when she first got arrested, and say that Hannah had personal relationships with some of these people and she swayed the jury. And so they had this huge narrative that they came up with. And so I think what has been delaying it partly is because they hired an expert witness that is getting whatever information about me that they can to try to prove what they're saying. So I don't know what's going to happen. I'm sure that they've, taken the other podcasts, anything public to try to use it. It's going to be kind of a witch hunt when the trial finally happens. But
Right.
I'm okay with that. Like I know what they're going to do and I know that the truth is going to come out. So
Yeah. Well, she's currently facing 13 felony charges. And, I know obviously this is ongoing, so there's not a lot of detail we can go into relating to these specific charges in this case. But this is something that there's been patterns of abuse that you've talked about that go back through early childhood. You talked about some of this on our earlier conversations, but we didn't focus in specifically on your mom's interactions with you. Um, Going back to the very beginning, like take me back to your childhood in the Leaks household. Like, what did that look like? And do you remember a specific point where you were like, you recognize now, like, okay, that's when abuse really started?
it's really hard to go back and pinpoint this is when abuse started. I know from the time I was really little, my mom and I didn't have the same bond that my mom and my sister had. My mom nursed her through, I think, 2.5, and that's when she got pregnant with me. And I think my existence was hard for her from the beginning. I've kind of tried to put puzzle pieces back together to try to understand it, but I'm pretty sure she had severe postpartum depression. Some of my earliest memories are of her telling me that I rejected her when I was a newborn. She said that I wouldn't breastfeed, and I know that really upset her. She said I wouldn't make eye contact, and there would be times where I got in trouble and she would say, "You never loved me. Like you never loved me." And that it happened often enough to where I believed it. And I would take every time she would say that, I would, as a child, everything is personal. So you're like, okay, well, you never loved me. And so that was something I just remember, like kind of like a huge gaping hole, thinking that my mom just never connected with me and it was something wrong with me. Because I did see it with, she could be very, very nurturing and very loving with other people's kids. And with my sister, I saw it, but I also saw a very hot and cold dynamic with them where she would hug her and love on her, but then it would be flip and be abuse. And so I think what I gathered very early on was to just be quiet and to kind of stay in the shadows and just observe and not get in trouble. Like I was really good at not getting in trouble. One of the first very explosive, I know I talked about one of the first times I saw witnessed abuse of my sister, but one of the first like really scary things that and imprinted on my memory was my sister was getting ready to go to kindergarten. And I think that triggered my mom's like abandonment or whatever she had going on mentally at that time. And she was screaming at my dad and she took my sister's lunchbox and threw it. It was like the old metal strawberry shortcake lunchbox with the thermos and everything. And I just remember it very vividly hitting the wall and crashing down. And I have like little snippets of memories like that, but there would also be times of like what I always saw as peace and happiness. My mom was very social when she was younger. She interacted a lot with people in the church. She kept very busy. She would be involved in cooking and all kinds of back in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, BBC was a lot more fun, I guess you could say in some ways. Like they had like a float in the parade and everybody dressed up like clowns and there was just a lot going on. It was very busy. And I think that the big change I saw was when I was around 7, when my mom's mom died. And that was a huge trigger for her. And things declined very rapidly. And that was also the time where my parents took in the girl that was 16 and pregnant. And so I think it was like there was a lot of stressors and there was a lot of things that just kind of made the situation, I guess you could say, just everything just kind of hit at once. And like any kind of mental health struggles that she had been fighting or facing, they just were kind of brought to the surface at that point.
Yeah. Talk to me about your parents bringing in a 16-year-old girl into the home and, what prompted that first and foremost, and how did that change the dynamic within your family to now have another teenager basically like planted into the household? Like, what did that look like functionally?
Well, my mom, one thing that I will say about her is she kind of had that like rescuer, superhero, they call it the Jesus Christ syndrome, where now I understand, because it's something that I've struggled with over the years. Before I recognized my own traumas and dealt with my own pain inside, you have this tendency to want to help everybody else and want to like reach out and fix things and be some superhero for somebody else because you didn't have that yourself. And so that's one thing I did. I do think my mom had a heart to like help people. I don't think that she went into it with evil intentions, but I think that she was struggling. And so this was something that distracted her from, I guess you could say, the demons within her. And so I don't know exactly how my parents got the story that I was told was that the pastor announced from the pulpit, hey, we have this girl from one of the villages that got pregnant. She has fetal alcohol syndrome, so she can't raise this baby on her own. Is somebody willing to take her in and help her raise this baby? So this is a big ask, And so my parents took her in. They also became friends with the missionary that was in that village, and that's Ronnie Starr. And so my parents housed missionaries when they would come in for the villages for shopping trips and everything. So it was a tight knit community, and my parents decided to take her in. So they took her in, and that was where my little world definitely got turned upside down. She was feral, I guess you could say. She was a wild girl, and my mom took it on herself to tame her. She'd been kind of raised on the streets and unparented, unmonitored for years and years, just going between houses and being abused. And so she was a very big job for my mom to try to, I guess my mom would have said, I'm going to civilize this girl, which is really sad to think about it now. Like she needed a lot of TLC. She needed kindness and trauma therapy and so
Yeah.
much
And
professional
professional,
help.
yeah,
Yes.
assistance. Yeah.
And then, my mom, who's absolutely not equipped to take on a case like this, took it on. And so, I just remember a lot of screaming. My mom was almost given the power by this missionary and by this pastor to do whatever she saw fit to this girl. And it was brutal. There were a lot of brutal things. Like when I hear about like the only thing I can relate it to is when I hear of like a slave master, like that's what it felt like. She worked around the house. She did whatever she was told to do. If she did something wrong, she would be beat. I just remember a lot of beatings, a lot of screaming.
Yeah.
So I
So,
don't necessarily when she was pregnant remember the beatings, but definitely afterward. So
yeah. Uh, Was this something where you'd say, because obviously there's like a sliver of good intentions at the beginning of this that sets this in motion, but then it very
Mhm.
quickly devolves into what it became, which was this very abusive kind of like lording over this person. Do you feel looking back like, okay, she was taking how she treated us and just transplanting that and putting it onto her? Or do you think the treatment of her was far worse than what you guys had experienced personally up to that point?
Well, at that point, I believe my dad was still a really big buffer. Like he didn't work outside, like he became an artist and he worked in our home or in a shop outside of our home. He was very heavily involved with us. He helped my mom with us. And so I don't think she would have, whatever she had inside, that anger and rage and unresolved trauma and so much that she was holding in. I don't think that she would have been allowed at that point to really direct it towards us, even though sometimes it would spill out and there would be abuse. But at that point, I would have been 7 and my sister was 9. And like I said, she was pretty distracted with things at the church, and she would have times where now I could see it was like a manic episode of either really overperforming and just out there doing her thing. And then she would crash and be depressed and stay in bed for a few days and sometimes even longer. But I think that it was almost like she was given the keys to this thing that made her feel powerful and made her feel like she had some control over something. And
Hmm.
there wasn't accountability with her. Like nobody loved this girl, nobody protected her. And so it was just kind of like unfettered, like, here, do what you want.
Yeah. And for context for people listening who don't remember, like this is in Alaska, so you've got a lot of like tribal populations nearby. Ronnie Starr is literally aviation missionary, so he's a pilot flying to these areas. And so it wasn't too uncommon from my understanding for there to be people in the church like going in and doing these short-term missions trips in native communities, or bringing kids over and people in the church helping in some way. Like there was a lot of crossover between those two groups, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yes, definitely. And Ronnie Starr kind of planted himself sometime in the 70s when he still had kids at home, planted himself in the village of Fort Yukon. And so he was back and forth to Fairbanks often. It's only, I think it's like maybe an hour flight. And even though it's an isolated community, he had these local connections, and there's a whole story there with him
Sure.
and how his ministry caused a lot of damage. Some people will say that he did a lot of good, but there's definitely some stories there where children were harmed, And so
Yeah.
I used to think he had good intentions with this girl, but now I don't even know. Like, part of her story is that she came to my parents. She was pregnant, supposedly 4 or 5 months pregnant. They found out it was a cancerous pregnancy growing, and she had a DNC. She was sent immediately back to the village. Within a month or two, she was pregnant again and sent back to my parents. So now I'm like, this is like some of the pieces just don't really fit.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why she was sent back so quickly and into the same exact situation where she could, the same thing happen. And so yeah, I don't really know. I don't understand it, but I do know that's kind of like where the the extreme abuse that I would witness started. There was, one instance with her baby and it was a very odd situation just with her baby because she gave birth to him. She would take care of him, but my mom kind of treated him like more like she was the mom and she had
Hmm.
the power, and he absolutely loved her. Like, she was a very loving, he called her grandma. She would be very, very loving with him, very nurturing, and spoil him. He had every toy. He was very well taken care of by me and my sister. We'd always wanted a baby sibling. So it was like, there's this new baby in the house, and we all were in love. Like, he was just the sweetest thing. And then there would be abuse. Like, one time, I think she was following the train up your child principles, but she was in the bed with him and he dropped his bottle off the bed, and she set him down on the floor and said, pick up your bottle. And he just kept trying to climb back up on the bed. Like, I don't even think that he understood what she was saying. And she started beating him, and she gave him several beatings until he finally got what she was asking, and he picked up the bottle. And so it was like, she came out and was like, yeah, this is about the age where they get that will, and you have to break their will. Every child has
Hmm.
that strong will that you have to break. And I just remember being absolutely devastated by that, like knowing that it was wrong.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I think, and then there wasn't a strong bond between my sister and I and his mom, the girl, because I think when you witness abuse being done, it just kind of like, you put guards up. And I mean, I will even say how we were trained to boss her around and treat her kind of like a house slave. Like, she would start my bath for me. She would do all my laundry. She would put it away. She did all the dishes. My mom didn't really let her do any cooking. She wasn't into cooking, but pretty much everything else in the house she did.
Yeah. Yeah. How quickly did this grow from just being her to more children being introduced to the mix? Was that after you had left already?
No, when I was about 12, so I guess it would have been about, the little guy was 5-ish. My mom got a newborn baby from somebody in the church, had a family member that they were asking around if anybody wanted a baby. And they, my mom said yes, she had wanted a baby for years and couldn't have any more. And so within a short period of time, the grandma of this baby, the mom was young and not able to care for it. And so the grandma of the baby showed up at our front door, and, we'd known about her for about a week. And, my sister and I were very excited. And I was always very like mothering and very nurturing. So this was like my dream come true, where I was getting a baby sister. And my mom made it a big deal. We went to JCPenney and bought all the cute little frilly outfits and everything. And so she came, and that was another trauma that was just something that she used. She would use things that you love to abuse you. And I remember when she first came, she let me hold her for a few minutes, and then she told me no more. Like, she's going to bond with you and not me. So you can't hold her. Like, I wasn't allowed to just sit and hold her and take care of her at all. Like, as a 12-year-old girl who loved babies, like, that was the most heartbreaking thing she could have ever done. And so she did have my sister do a lot of the care for the baby, but she just wouldn't really let me do anything.
Were these all, were each of these like formal adoptions? Like, because there was the one, and then there was six more following that. Were they all
Yeah.
formal adoptions? Were they foster? Like, legally, what did this look like? Or was it just like
So with
prolonged
the older
babysitting?
girl that was 16, because it was just a private situation where she was pretty much plopped into their home, I don't think they wanted to spend the money to do a private adoption, which can be thousands of dollars. So she was never officially adopted by my parents. They just housed her. But when the next baby came, that was a private adoption. And she was adopted. I think she was close to a year old when the adoption finally was finalized. And then further on down the road, several years later, after I had already moved out, that's when, well, the summer when I was 16, my parents started fostering. And so that was their first experience with fostering, and they fostered several children. My mom made friends with a lady who was a caseworker for like the Tanana Chiefs Conference, which is like the native foster care here in Fairbanks. And she had pretty much an endless possibilities of children that she could take on and foster and possibly adopt. So then the next um, set of six that came later, they were all foster care that were eventually adopted.
And these were all native children, right?
So all of them were native except for the last two boys. They
Okay.
were not native kids.
And my understanding from our previous conversations is that there wasn't very much oversight from their local communities, like the government, because there's like a weird. I grew up in California near reservation. And I know there's like they had their own kind of government system, and also they're also under ours, and I still don't really fully understand it. But my understanding is like the in Alaska where they were adopting these children, there wasn't any like agency or something overseeing these. Am I correct in
There
that?
was, but they're very overworked. So the way it works is like there's CPS, which up here in Alaska, it's OCS, Office of Children's Services. And they're kind of like the main entity that is called when any child goes into care or there's a child in need of aid. OCS here is the main entity. But then the Native children have like the tribal portion of it that they're also involved. And at this point, all the native foster kids were in kind of a separate, like Child Protective Services, OCS didn't have jurisdiction or didn't have any involvement in their cases. It was all here. It's called Tanana Chiefs Conference, and they are, pretty much they have a child protective entity in their program. And so at that point, OCS wasn't involved in those cases. It was just the tribal portion. And so they, I do believe that they have the children's best interest at heart, but I also know that they're very overworked. They don't have a lot of resources.
Which
And
sounds exactly like CPS in any
right,
other
right.
area. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So I also know that my mom knew very well how to, I guess grooming is the only word that comes to mind, because she would find out who was in charge of a tribe, or who was in charge of um a certain entity, and she would make friends with them. She would send baked goods out on planes to the villages. She would do whatever she could to kind of make our family, make herself look good, and make like she was a safe home for these children. And so, she used the church, she used our family, she used, I didn't find out till later that she was inviting me and my sister and all our kids over when she knew that the caseworker was going to come for a visit. And she wanted it to look like one big happy family.
It's interesting you say that because my friend Isami was a missionary kid in Japan, and extremely similar thing. Her parents were church planners. And so, well, her parents were church planners in quotes. They were living in Japan and had a very small ministry, were collecting income from that. And whenever someone would visit from the church to check on the thriving ministry that they had there, they would go out like the week before and invite everyone in the community for free food. And so they would pack out their church with all these people. And so it looked amazing in pictures and in reports. But it was that same thing. It's like, how do I look really good for this like 48-hour period? And then
Mhm.
everyone can leave. And it sounds like that's kind of the same
Yeah,
kind of
that's
thing. It's
very,
like,
very similar, actually. Yeah.
yeah. So obviously, like people that have heard your story, like there's so much that happened just personally for you where like it's probably hard to see the forest for the trees in terms of like how much abuse is actually happening, what's happening to me versus what's happening here, what's connected to the church, what's not. So, what point did you realize, like, okay, not only are we all having like some rough things happen, or we're having some things happen that are negative, but like this is abusive and all of these kids are really in a dangerous position. Like, was that, all that happen after you left where you're like, okay, this is actually really, really
Yeah.
dangerous?
It's so complicated because, I think back on some of the things that have kind of just like that impacted me, like abusive things that impacted me as a child, and then how much it was interlaced in like the religion and the honor your parents, and like the school story of wanting to be smart and wanting to be good and wanting so badly to please my parents and my teachers, but then being unable to understand, and having the learning disability, and just kind of getting that core feeling like that I'm bad and I've done something wrong, and my parent is good, because especially in IFB, they're elevated to this godlike level. And one story that stands out that kind of shows you like the internal struggle would be, I think I was around 11 and I broke my leg. My cousin and I were goofing around, and we decided to go sailing down some stairs on a toy box lid, and
Always a good choice. That's it
really
for
fun.
sure.
And I was a bigger girl, and we'd been doing it all day, but then we'd gone somewhere, so I had socks on, and like I hit the floor, the carpeted floor, and my body and my feet stopped, and I kept going, and shattered my leg in three places. And I remember my mom freaked out, and my dad came down, and this just kind of shows you my parents. Like my dad was like, just try to walk on it. You're fine. You're okay. Like just try to walk on it. And I remember thinking, like, are you serious right now? Like, can you not see that I'm in pain? And so I tried to walk on, of course, crumbled, and it ended up, it was a weird situation because I went to my bed, or actually I was taken to the clinic. They did x-rays and they said, yeah, you're going to need surgery. They sent me home. My parents went out to get pain medicine, and I was in bed for hours just laying there suffering until they got home. And one point I was screaming loud enough to like neighbors started to come over and tell me, like, just say like, what can we do? And back then there was no cell phone, so they couldn't get a hold of my parents. And anyway, so I ended up getting taken to the hospital and got immediate pain relief, and they sent me in for surgery. And I remember waking up and my mom was standing over me with this look, and she's like, I need to know what you did to cause this. And I just remember being terrified, like barely coming out of anesthesia and thinking like back on anything that I could have done. And she said, "Were you touching yourself again?" Like, because like I can only imagine a few things you would do to receive this kind of punishment from God. And that's something that she knew about, I guess, or like she had groomed me towards. And she instilled this fear in me of just like, okay, I did something wrong and this is my punishment. And she used some Bible verse, like there's correction unto death, there's correction unto, I don't even remember. I probably blocked it out, but she referenced this Bible verse of like why God would correct us and punish us. And so it just, that was the type of abuse that I experienced mostly, was just like a lot of like fearful, like just instilled in me to my core. And then when bad things would happen and you would call it out, or you would say,
Mm.
"Stop, no, this isn't okay," then it was always thrown back in your face that you're the one sinning because you're not forgiving and you're not, you're not praying for that person. You're not loving them. You're not doing whatever you should do. And so I think that my eyes really started to open um, when the first baby came, and I was abused in a way that was just so different, which was
Mm.
like being stopped from like loving, being controlled in a way that was very covert, but very, very damaging.
Yeah.
So that, I guess that was like where things really started for me, to where there was like two sides of my brain. But I guess in a lot of ways I lived in cognitive dissonance, and I wanted to believe what I was being taught, and that my parents were good and that they made mistakes. But then there would be like blaringly obvious things. Like when that baby was about 8 months old, we took a trip to Anchorage and we had this big van, and my mom would put her little car seat in between her and my dad's seat in
Hmm.
the front. And there was some big fight. I don't remember all the details, but my mom was convinced my dad had done something, and she was screaming and just like complete and rage. And we were driving to Anchorage, and she started to try to like hit my dad, and she knocked the rear view mirror off, and it hit the baby, and the baby started screaming. And so the baby was screaming and she was screaming, and like whatever happened triggered her so hard that she just started like smacking the baby in the face, like open handed, just like as hard as she could, just probably 10 times, like right in the face. And I just remember visualizing it. And the first thing that stood out was that my dad didn't stop her. Like he was within arm's reach, and he did not hold her hand back. He did not stop the car. He just sat there. And it just made me so angry. And I mean, at that point I had visions of like pushing her giant body out of the car. And the only thing that helped in that moment was my sister and I were in the back, and I was like, as soon as we get to Anchorage, I'm running away and I'm taking the baby. And
Mm.
we had just gotten our dividend money. And so we got to the hotel, and my sister was kind of like, she called herself the dragon tamer, where she would take care of mom, and she got her in bed. And at this point, my mom's morbidly obese, like 400 pounds ish. She got her in bed, and that's when I'm like, okay, we have to go. And she had the baby on her hip, and we went to the bathroom to talk, and she's like, "No, we can't go. We can't leave mom. Like, what would that do to dad? Like, we can't do this." And she talked me into staying. And so I think that I always knew, obviously, between like what happened to me, what happened to my sister, like the environment in the home, I knew there was abuse. I knew that it wasn't okay. But the religious aspect of it made it to where I would just make excuses for it, and I would forgive, and I would try to hope for the best and think the best. And so when my mom started taking in foster kids, and at this point, I had had kids of my own. We were still going to the same church. And it kind of became this situation where we were going over there a lot, and the kids kind of were something that would like bind us all together. My sister also had kids. And so it was like this family unit where we were all kind of on the same team in a way. And, we weren't seeing, like when my sister and I would bring our kids over, we weren't seeing just my mom beating kids and all this stuff happening. Like you have to understand, it was like between like she was volunteering at church, and she was grooming all these caseworkers and professionals to believe that she was this good person. And she was loving on her grandbabies and cooking meals. And I mean, then there would be these situations just like peppered throughout. Like there was one situation that stood out where it was one of the first times that I ever stood up and actually just was like, no, enough is enough. And it was one of the little girls was about 3 or 4, and she had a lack of food at her previous home. And so she had a lot of food issues surrounding food insecurities, and she was eating too fast. And my mom, whatever reason, that triggered her, and she walked over to the little table where the kids were at and started screaming in her face. And she was like, do you want to eat fast? I'll show you how to eat fast. And she had one of the other kids go get hot dogs, and she started just shoving these things down her throat, like just like to where she would throw up, and then she would shove more food down her throat. And she would scream in her face, is like, you want to drink too fast? And she had this huge bottle of something, and she was just making her guzzle it, and she would throw up, and then she would do it again. And it was just this, like, I've never seen anything like it. And it horrified me. And I was just sitting there frozen. And I just stood up and screamed at her to stop. And I was like, this is not okay. Like, stop it right now. And she had one of the kids go get my dad out of his shop. And then my dad came in and said, what's going on? And she's like, I'm trying to deal with her. I'm trying to discipline her, and she's getting involved. And so then both of them started verbally attacking me. And, it just kind of put me back into this childlike position of like, I just did something wrong, like just into silence. And then, of course, I grabbed my kids and left. And then it would kind of go through this cycle again where I would try to stay away. I wouldn't talk to her. I would just be like devastated and triggered and all the things,
Yeah.
and contemplating calling authorities. And then she would just start like this love bombing process and kind of pulling you back in and like, oh, come over for a meal. Like, it was never addressed. It was never talked about again. It was just like this cycle of pulling you back in. And then, of course, my thoughts are, if I don't honor her, if I do not forgive this, then that's going to come back on me and my kids. And then we're going to be in danger. So just a lot of fear.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you hinted at, but you're also now the outsider to the home. So you're seeing the best of which is what's scary about these situations is, even when you're seeing the best of, you're still seeing stuff slip through the cracks. It's like, okay, there's something really bad here happening underneath the surface. But I have to imagine too, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm curious, like often I notice, and this goes back to just people whose parents spank them really hard a lot. They have this feeling of, I turned out okay, or, look at me, I have a family of my own, and, I have a job, and my life is okay. I turned out fine. Did you have any of that where you're like, you were reticent to even be like, okay, my mom's abusive, or where you're like, yeah, that's how she is, but that's not her all the time. Like, what was the story? Like, if you were to, like, paint a picture of your mom in your mind at that time, would you have been like, oh, abusive monster constantly? Or would it have been like, it's my mom, it's complicated, I wouldn't go that far? Like, how did you view her during that stage?
I think my sister and I would talk a lot, and we knew that she was unstable, obviously. And we would talk about like, oh, mom's crazy, mom's crazy. But
Was that, and sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just curious, like, when you say like, oh, mom's crazy, were you thinking like, oh, there's legitimately something mentally wrong that needs addressing? Or was it just something like, it's the way people go like, oh, that's my crazy uncle that, does this and it doesn't make sense, but that's
well,
kind of the way you explain it away.
yeah, it's kind of strange because like we knew we had this knowledge of her craziness, but like it was like this dirty family secret because she was so good at hiding it. And she was so good at only pulling out the weapon when she either felt safe to do it or she would just become completely unhinged. I guess what stands out to me being in the church and being in this family was that I was really never given like the freedom to mature and grow into like a healthy adult that could assess a situation and make a choice and have boundaries and have anonymity. Like it just didn't exist in this environment. And you would think, like, how could somebody that had seen the things that they saw from this woman ever trust them with her children, like ever stand up at an adoption, like ever even like go to this woman's house again? Like, how could you do that? Like there's the story, which I believe I referenced in an earlier episode, but if not, it's probably the one that stands out the most to me as one of the most like impactful, traumatizing events, like of my life to this day. And that is when my sister had gotten pregnant out of wedlock, and my mom and dad were fighting, and my sister was crying, and for whatever reason it sent my mom into this just almost like disassociative manic episode to where she literally started talking into like as this childlike voice. And she said that she was going to kill all of us. We had just eaten dinner, so there's like a steak knife by her plate right beside her. And she said, I'm going to grab that knife and I'm going to kill all of you. I'm going to cut that baby right out of your belly. That's what she told my sister. And she was completely not there, like completely different voice, just a total mental snap. And my sister started quoting Bible verses to her. And eventually she just kind of like her body kind of relaxed, her head went down, and she ended up just kind of going into like a deep depressive episode. But during that time, my dad and I were terrified and ended up going towards the door. My sister was the one that stayed beside her and calmed her down, and my dad and I were about to just jump ship. Like we would fully believe that she was going to follow up. She had never been, usually when she would lose it, she would throw things, scream, hit people. Like she would go into episodes of rage, but that was more terrifying because she was so calm and deliberate about what she was going to do. So you would go back to that and think, okay, as an adult child that came out of that home with my own kids, like why didn't my protective nature of my children like step in? And I would say that I would have moments of clarity and just be like, just sick and devastated and not know what to do. But then it was like those words from the pulpit, from the pastor, would come back to me. And I would say, you have to give grace. You have to, this is not who she is. This is, it was one mistake. It was, so I'd have this internal dialogue, this internal like struggle of knowing the truth, knowing this wasn't okay, but believing that as a daughter to this woman, it was my job to help her. It was my job to explain away what she was doing, to justify it, to whitewash it. And so, ultimately it led to me feeling almost like an accomplice to what she was doing, and the abuse. Like it just, I would have nightmares, especially when I was pregnant. I would have nightmares of her and her stealing my babies and her hurting children. Like it just, I know in my subconscious that I always knew the right thing, but I didn't always do the right thing.
Right. Well, it is such a difference too. Like, I can imagine, because like I always talk about growing up in that world. In my mind, the hierarchy stopped at pastor. Like, if things get bad enough, go to pastor. Like, law enforcement was never even an umbrella. Like, law enforcement was, if you see a kidnapping happening on the street, you go find a cop. But like, they existed in a different world than the church, at least for myself.
Yeah.
What I would say is, I think like the privilege of being a man in that world is that you do have the ability to like call out something as being bad. Whereas like I can imagine knowing your background just from our conversations and knowing just the experience of women in fundamentalist churches, like you're even more disempowered to say something is wrong, like even when you're an adult. And so I have to imagine too, there's a piece there where it's like, who am I to talk about my mom? Even if she is, as bad as I can see, or even if there's like the sliver of things which are bad enough to normally say something, like I have to imagine you felt on some level like, who am I to say that? Like there is a
Yeah.
right person to address this and it's not going to be me. But again, I
Yeah.
don't want to,
Yeah, I
make an
maybe because
assumption.
my dad was like absolutely not alpha and had like no backbone whatsoever. Like I I don't feel like, at least in our family unit, there was like this, like the men lord over the women. We were kind of an oddball family when it came to that, because if anybody was abusing anybody, at least like overtly, it was my mom to my
Hmm.
dad, like throwing stuff at him and, you know, trying hitting him and, definitely domestic violence. My dad was more of a covert abuser where he would have expectations. You asked earlier about like, some of my like thoughts about my family and just like how religion played into it. And that was something my dad, like one of his jobs in this whole system was to kind of like talk to me and my sister. Like he would come to us if something happened and he would ask questions, and he would just lay the groundwork in a different way. Like he would say things like, our family is so blessed. Like we're just like, he had kind of like this elitist mentality about how like our family was so blessed and we're set apart and look what all God's done for us and blessed us with all these children. And then he also would do this weird thing where he would question me about my childhood, and he would say like, you seem to have some bitterness going on. Like, what do you remember? Like what kind of memories do you have of your childhood that you think that could have caused so much bitterness in you? And I mean, so he was kind of like an accomplice in a much more like insidious way. But like as far as like that not being one of the reasons like that I spoke out, I think it could have come into play, but I also think it was more complex. One time we went to Doug Duffett, and it was when that first adopted baby, she was at this point a teen and having a lot of conflicts with my mom. At one point, my mom even threatened to like get a gun, and like she was just being very physically abusive, and she couldn't handle the independence, and she was dominating her and abusing her, and to the point where she was ready to run away. And so she would come to mine and my husband's house. And so we took her to talk to Pastor Duffett, and he just was very like complacent. He was very like accusatory of like, well, what did you do to make this situation happen? And I did, at that point, I confided in him about some of the stuff that was happening with the adopted siblings. And he shut it down so quick. He was like, no, I know this woman. She would never do that. Like, you know, like pretty much just turned it back on me. And that was very common. And then there was another instance where my sister had gone to Tom Suter. Do you know who that is? He deals
Uh,
with like demonology, I guess you could say, where he like goes to around to churches and talks about like the spiritual realm and like does, I don't know if he actually does exorcisms, but um he talks about like basically like the spiritual world and struggles, that
hmm.
Christians face. And he has kind of a crazy story because his wife, there's like a murder suicide where he was a pastor and his wife and daughter were at the parsonage while he was preaching, and his daughter killed the wife and then shot herself. And then he came home, and so he goes around to all these churches. I don't know if he still does. And he would frequent BBC, and he
What's his last name?
Suter, Sooter,
Oh, okay.
Tom Suter.
I was trying every variation of it. That's interesting. See, I, I,
I would
I
be
got
surprised if you haven't heard any stories from
Tom
him because
Suter. I'm not seeing anything. Let me just see. Oh, Sooter. Oh, okay, okay, okay. I'm seeing him now. All right, I'm leaving that open for myself. I went down the demonology rabbit hole as one of my last steps out, so I'm very fascinated to look
yeah,
at.
yeah. I'm surprised you haven't heard about him because he's pretty big in the IFB world.
Over the years, we've worked with people, demonic spirits speaking out of them. We've worked with wizards, warlocks, all kinds of people in the satanic realm. Now, I'll just be real frank with you. I would never have volunteered for any of this. I just wanted to be a happy little preacher.
He went to Bible Baptist one time, and my sister actually went and talked to him about some of the struggles that we had, my sister and I separately, with the family and my mom. And of course, he had like, you know, probably zero mental health experience, and it was all demons, and it was all family generational demons. And, he gave whatever advice. And so it's not like nobody ever heard about it. Like, this kind of stuff was being reported, like the inner workings of the family were being talked about, and absolutely should have been reported to law enforcement, knowing that kids were in danger. But it was just over spiritualized and just kind of dismissed.
So all this period here is like 2010, 2012.
So she started taking like foster placements starting in 1999. She had several placements before she took permanent placements. And so I would say about 2003, 2004-ish was when she started taking like the first sibling set that was a permanent placement.
Okay. So I'm just trying to think in terms of the flow. 2017 is when you reported based on my notes, right? Is that right?
Yeah. So when she got the last two siblings set, they were not through the tribal organization.
Yeah,
they were OCS. And the reason she took them in is because there was a couple in the church. There's a family in the church that would do like emergency foster care. And they had these kids off and on for months, and they weren't interested in having them long term. And so that's when they approached my mom about taking them. And I know my dad didn't want more kids in the home, and he already knew that she was unstable and that she probably shouldn't have kids in the first place. And so I think the draw for these two little guys was the money, to be honest, because they would get a pretty good stipend from the state for them. And so at the point she got them, the parental rights hadn't even been terminated yet. And I know the parents were still trying to get them back. I think they were drug users. There's some domestic violence. And at this point, the little guy was barely 2 and the older one was 5. And they were just the most adorable babies, like the sweetest. Like the 2-year-old was just chubby and barely walked, and because he'd been neglected and left a lot in cribs and whatnot. And so they also came with a sister, like a half sister. And so she got all 3 of them. And at some point decided she didn't want the girl. And then, so she had the boys. And I think like my internal struggle was just so, at that point, the way we viewed my mom was like, we thought of her as a good mom, a good grandma, a good person. But then if she, like, think of it as a cup, if it hit the brink, then it would overflow, and that's when she would become bad. Like, that was kind of like how in my mind she operated. And like, when we would justify my sister and I leaving our kids with her or trusting her, it was like we would talk amongst ourselves, and it would be an open conversation. Like, do you think mom's in a good place? Like, do you think she's okay right now? And then decide if, okay, can we leave our kids, or can we, because there would be times where my husband and I would take trips with his work. Like he had like a sales incentive trip, and it was such an internal struggle because part of me wanted to run away from everything. Like it was very hard to live in this environment. And so if there was an opportunity to escape either with my kids or, on one of these trips, like I would want to take it. But then in my mind, I would have to justify that she was safe and that my kids would be okay. Oh. And so my sister and I would talk and would say, like, is she safe? Is she okay? And then she would agree to kind of keep an eye on her and let me know. And then, if she could step in, but then we also knew that like I couldn't let my sister watch the kids or mom would get mad. Like, she had to be in control of the whole family. And so I would say in 2017, things started to unravel because, well, I think it was a few years earlier, things started to unravel around the time that she got the last 2 boys in 2014. She decided to take on a business, and there's a local park, and she decided to open a burger shack. Like, she loved to cook, and she always wanted a restaurant or a food truck. And so she decided to open this place called Mama Grizzlies. And I would say that it was a mixed blessing for our family because I mean, now I see it as a huge blessing because what happened when she took that on, like she was working long days. And before that, she had always been like the family was her, like she was the hub of the family. Like everybody tiptoed around her. Everybody did what she said. Everybody catered to her because she would explode if you didn't. And so when she took on this business, it's like she had this distraction and there was like this radio silence of like a kid's birthday would come around and she wasn't like controlling the dialogue or controlling what we were going to do. It was just like, in a way, I remember at first it felt like abandonment. So I'm like, wait a minute. She's told us all these years that we should never work outside the home. Like she's controlled so much and like what she says goes. And this is something that she was always against. Like, why is she doing this? Like, and And then as she's at this place and she's busy, like it was just like this awkward silence at first, but then it was wonderful because you actually didn't have to consult her because she was so busy and distracted. And so it was definitely in the beginning, it was confusing and it caused a lot of discomfort, but it also caused like self-reflection and like the inability to keep in this cycle of abuse that had occurred my entire life. Like even as an adult, and even like my husband even got sucked into it. Like there was just no breathing room with her because she was so involved in our lives. And this caused there to be breathing room. And so I would say it was a wonderful thing that happened to all of us.
Yeah.
Not so much to the kids because here they are trapped in this little hut in a public place and caused to sit and to be quiet. And I remember the 5-year-old would have to like all of our kids would be out, we'd visit them at the shop and they would all be out riding scooters and having fun and playing. And the one little guy had to sit on a little patch of the grass out in the distance where my mom could see him through the window. And one of my kids, I didn't find this out till recently, but one of my kids even came into her little restaurant, Burger Shack, and saw her with the little guy. Like he was at that point, it would be a summer thing. So she got the place when they were little, like 2. And then every summer, this would take up her entire summer, 12 hours a day. And so at this point, I don't know how far in this was, but he was potty training and she wouldn't want him out of her control long enough to go to the bathroom. And so one of my older kids walked in and she was having him go to the bathroom in a cup, like right where she could see it. And like not to mention like what a public health risk that would be, but like it just shows you how much she just like had to have control.
Come 2017, filing a report with OCS, you went with your sister and a retired OCS worker to report this. What was it that came across like in front of you where you're like, okay, that's reportable. We need to address this. And obviously I know there's some things we have to be vague about and you can't give away specifics about even maybe victim gender in some of these cases because it would be too specific. But what was it that you saw that we were like, okay, this is reportable. We need to like take some actual steps here to go, okay, let's talk about this.
Well, I think just to back up again a little bit, but not to like go too far into the past. My parents have used my head injury to kind of create their own narrative and their own scapegoat, I guess you could say. And I think one of the reasons that they're just so drawn to it is because there was a pretty big shift in my ability to suppress what I saw happening when I got the head injury. Like it affected me in a lot of ways. It took away my ability to pretend. It took away my ability to have rose-colored glasses. It took away my ability to like religiously explain it away and to just be blind. Like it took my blinders off. Like it would be like if you just fell from a height, like just smacked the ground, like that was, and you would like got up and you had to recover from that. Like it impacted me. And so
it wasn't generating these memories. It was just removing that block of like,
yeah, like it didn't create any false memories. Like I had all these memories. The head injury took away my ability to pretend it didn't happen and to suppress it and to explain it away. And so it was like I felt so raw and I felt so exposed. And so that happened in summer of 2016. So that was a big trauma. And then spring of 2017, I almost died. We were on a vacation and I had what they call a heterotopic pregnancy, where there was one baby growing in the uterus and one in my fallopian tube, and the one in the fallopian tube ruptured. But they saw the one in the uterus, so they didn't know that that's what had happened, even though I had all the symptoms. And I even told them that I thought that's what happened because I'd had an ectopic pregnancy in the past, which made me more predisposed to this type of very rare pregnancy complication. So I was in Arizona, didn't know any of the doctors. They literally got me dressed and tried to send me away out the doors of the ER. And that's when I collapsed and they had to rush me back for emergency surgery. And I was by myself. And so that was really traumatic because I almost didn't make it. I lost a lot of blood. And so that happened in the spring of 2017. And I remember coming home and just being like even more like just depressed, and like the reality of my life was just undeniable. And I couldn't numb it. I mean, one thing that helped me through the years was just like having babies, and maybe I had an addiction to having babies because I gave birth a lot of times. But one thing pregnancy and my kids did was just like it was something that was like healing to me, and it made me happy. And like the kids were so innocent, and maybe like loving those kids and treating them kindly and with respect, like it just felt healing and happy to me because I knew that I wanted to rewrite history. Like I didn't want children to feel like the way that my mom had made children feel. And so not having that
parenting reframes your childhood a lot.
Yeah,
I mean, I think about that all the time, where it's like the older my kid gets, I'm like, oh, so that thing that happened at that age wasn't normal for me. Or like, or how could a parent? Because I think as a kid, you go, I'll understand when I'm in their shoes. And I think when you don't, it's kind of like a big eye opener of like, oh, I would never have done that. I can't imagine doing that to my kids, you know?
Yeah, that was something that was majorly held over my head. It was just like, just wait till you have kids and they treat you the way you're treating me. Like you're going to have so many regrets, and you're going to see how hard it has been to be your mom and to deal with you. And one thing my mom would say on repeat to us was like, you are our report card. You're my report card. And I'm getting a big fat F. And that was like always like stated to us. And so thinking about things like that and being like, I would never say that to my kids. Like I would get frustrated and I'm fighting and whatever is happening. I'm just like, not ever imagine. And so 2017, in the spring of 2017, when I got back from that trip, and we were gone for a month to Costa Rica. Another one of my coping skills is to escape whenever possible. And so we got the travel bug, and we would save all year and take our kids on big adventures. And so
leaving Alaska for Costa Rica sounds like a good idea as well. So it's understandable.
Yeah. It would just be like a little slice of heaven with just my kids, and knowing that we didn't have to face any of the things that were our reality. And so the spring of 2017, I don't know what transpired with my mom, if us being gone kind of maybe stirred some things up with her. But I remember I saw my sister in the Sam's Club parking lot. We have Costco now, but it was back when it was Sam's Club. And she told me, she's like, Mom's in a really bad place. Like she's going to kill him. And she was referring to the youngest of the kids, all adopted at this point. And she said, she's going to kill him. Like I went over there, and his face was black and blue. He had bruises. She stood at the door and wouldn't let me see him. He was kind of playing off in the corner, kind of hunched over, and he turned his face, and she said his whole side of his face was black and blue. She's like, you have to go over there and you have to do something. And at that point, I didn't know what to do. I knew that if I went there, I would be reporting it. And I was really stuck. And there was this one lady in the church who I'd kind of like been drawn to. She was like close to my mom's age, maybe a little older. And she was just real. Like I liked how like she cussed, and she didn't mince words. Like she just seemed very, very real, and not, she wasn't walking around with the ankle length skirts. And, and so I asked if I could take her out to lunch. Her husband had just died. And So I took her out to lunch and I confided a little bit in some of the struggles. And she said that she had a similar issues with her mom. And so we kind of like got this little bond going. And then I was just devastated by what my sister told me and so scared. And so I remember calling her and just crying and saying, "You're the first person that I've ever opened up to about this. Like, please don't tell anyone." I knew that her daughter-in-law was a teacher, and I knew that a teacher was a mandated reporter. And I was like, please don't tell anybody. Like, I don't know what to do. And I unloaded on her a lot of what had happened over the years. And she just told me, like, you can't. I said, I want to report to the troopers. Like, I want to, and I don't know what to do. And she said that, no, you can't do that. She said, biblically, you have to go back to the Bible. She said, biblically, you have to confront the person however many times. And then if they don't change, then you can take it to authorities. And so I remember I called my mom that day and I told her what my sister said. And I said, I'm very, very close to calling the troopers. I can't see a child die on my watch. Like, this isn't okay. And I told her that if she didn't get help, like, the next step was to report her. And she did not take it well. She, got really accusatory and tried the whole, and I just shut it down. She'd be like, she would question, like, what did you see? Like, why are you saying this? Like, and she would at first start with all the questions, and then she turned into like this weak victim to where she was just crying and like, nobody ever helps me. Nobody ever does anything. I have to do this all on my own. And so it was an odd conversation because I think at the end she kind of conceded a little bit. And she said she would get help. And so that was like a big deal because she'd never done that before. And then I'm pretty sure her counsel was just going to the pastor and talking crap about me. I'm sure she took zero accountability. But at that point I was like, okay, I did what I have to do, but then I was also terrified that the abuse was just going to get worse or hidden more. Right. So that would have been April-ish of 2017. And over that summer, I would say that I wasn't able to shake the feeling of just, I can't do this anymore. Like, I cannot pretend anymore. And I slowly started to disconnect even more from my parents and even the church at that point. I was just over it all. Like, I couldn't do it anymore. And I was still trying to recover from my head injury. And so that's when my husband and I started talking and we decided to leave the state. And we had taught I also had a son that had complex medical issues with his lungs. The doctors didn't really know what was going on, but he was hospitalized pretty much every month. At this point, he was around 3, and he had been hospitalized several times with breathing struggles and pneumonias and aspiration. And like, they just didn't know what was wrong. And so his doctor had said he needed to be in like a warmer, humid environment. And so they're like, we're just going to take a break. We're going to go to Florida for the winter and we're going to regroup. We're going to get some healing. And then we just kind of, I guess, in the Christian like explanation, put a fleece out and prayed and said, all right, God, if you want us to leave, then our house will sell and we'll never come back. If you want us to stay, then the house won't sell and we'll come back after the winter's over. So we put our house on Airbnb. Like, we gutted it out that summer. We worked really hard to get it all fixed up, and we just hit the road. And it felt like a leap of faith in a way. It felt like an escape. I felt really, really happy in the beginning and just like a prisoner that had been set free. But as the trip went on, I started to realize that like I couldn't run from demons. Like, they were like following me. And I guess the demons being trauma and enmeshment and like just so much that I couldn't run from. And so during that trip was when we got involved in a church down in Florida, and we got some of like kind of the first real awakenings that the environment that we were in was not even a normal IFB church. Like, it was much more cult-like and much more just extreme than even your average Baptist church. Yeah. And that it was really integral, like, turning point for us because we had that comparison in our mind, and the people were kind to us and they really loved on our kids. And they didn't have the same kind of like judgmental, legalistic, like view of if you don't do this thing, then you're going to hell kind of thing. One thing that happened before we left was my sister and I's relationship was also a really complicated one. I kind of went into that, I think, in the first podcast, but I think when I left, she was not happy about me leaving and she wanted out too. So she started to get her house ready to sell and start making preparations to leave. But I think she felt obligated to help the parents. But she came to me one night. We would often go out. One of the little ways that we escaped some of our family stuff going on and just like the heaviness of everything was that my sister and she lived right up the hill from me, and she would pick me up and we'd go into town and we would go to a restaurant and have tea and talk and whatever. And it was just like a bonding type experience. And we had gotten really close as adults. Like a lot of our pregnancies were around the same time. And so we had a lot in common. And so, we had talked about this kind of stuff. Like it was open dialogue with us. And she came to me, we went out one night and she said, we have to report, like this is getting worse. She had been at the parents' house. Like I said, she was getting her house renovated too. So she had been staying there off and on and spending some time there. And she had seen some horrible things happening to the younger ones, especially, at one point she said the little guy was being snuck to the bathroom by the one that was older. So at this point, they would have been like maybe 7 and 10 or something around those ages. And she said that he has to sneak to the bathroom to get water. Like it's really bad. We need to go report this. And so her plan was to go to the caseworker that my mom had made friends with over the years. And she was on the brink of retirement at this point because, when she was working she worked for like the native portion of Child Protective Services. So as a caseworker. So, at this point she had newly been diagnosed with Parkinson's and she had retired from that position and was working in another role in advocacy. And so I remember it was a dark, rainy night and my sister and I mustered up the courage to go to her house and we sat on the couch and just unloaded on her, just told her everything. And I remember thinking like, I was surprised that my sister was taking the step because she was so empathetic to my mom and she took care of her. Like she catered to her a lot, and so I was surprised that she'd be willing to take the step, like that she'd be willing to do that. Because there had been so many times where I'm like, I'm going to report, I'm going to do this. And she had talked me out of it. So we did it together, but we were both very adamant that we were anonymous. Like we were not ready to face our parents in court or to stand up to. So we didn't make a police report. We reported to her and she told us, she's like, I have to report it. I'm going to be sensitive with how I report it. But she said, I'm a mandated reporter. This is what I have to do. And so I don't know if she went to law enforcement, but she did go to the other, the OCS, which is Office of Children's Services. And she reported it. At that time, I didn't know that when you make an anonymous report, it's almost like not making a report at all. Like it's not taken seriously. Like if you don't put your name behind it, if you're not able to stand up and say, this is what I saw, this is what happened, then the report just kind of goes nowhere.
Right.
So the kids were, at that point, I think they sent over like a intake worker and they interviewed them in the home. They talked to my mom and it was just completely, nothing happened.
Yeah.
And then that's when the next month is when we left for the entire winter. And then I think it was February of 2018, my sister called me in Florida and she told me at that point she'd been staying with my mom for quite some time during the renovations of her home. And so she had told me just even more, just horrific stories. And I told her, I said, I have to report this. Like, I can't report what you told me. And so I called our friend, the lady that had been the caseworker. I called her again and she got me in contact with more people from OCS and more people from TCC, which is the Native organization.
Right.
And they interviewed me. They talked to me. The kids were removed, taken to Stevie's place, and my sister went with them as support,
And
which now I can look back.
Stevie's place is like a third party space
Yeah.
that police use to basically interview children where they feel
Children.
instead of being
Yeah.
at a police station or something for
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
listening. The first time I heard that was like, I think 2 years ago. I was like, what is that? And I realized it's like a whole separate facility where they can.
Yeah. A lot of
Yes,
cities
yeah.
have them where it's great for
It
kids
is,
that,
yeah.
because it's like, they say that every time a kid's having to relay their story, like it's traumatic, so, and this
Yeah.
is kind of like they're in a room speaking to one individual, and then it's recorded and kind of like the closed circuit type thing.
Right.
And so they were taken there, and they spent the entire day there and were interviewed, and none of the kids, as far as I know, none of them disclosed anything.
Hmm.
One of the things that's kind of crazy to me that's come out in like I read this in the news article. I had no idea about this because all of these records are supposed to be sealed. But I found out that the little guy at least had lost weight, like a significant amount of weight. And like on the growth chart, like he had dipped way down. And that wasn't a red flag for them. Like, the fact that he, as the 2-year-old, had been, this robust, healthy, chubby guy. And then he goes in as this, however old he was, 6 years old or something. And he's at this point like emaciated. And that wasn't a red flag for them. Like it just baffles me.
Yeah.
So at that point, the kids had been questioned. Like I remember even seeing my mom like question the kids and like coach them about like what to say if you were ever questioned. And like they were all terrified of being taken and put in a house with taken by OCS and being put in a house with drunk people and abused. And like, their familiar abuse was probably more appealing at that point, at least for most of them, because there had been so much fear instilled in them, and then you also add in like the religious factor of being told that this is your parent and they've done all these good things for you and you can't speak out against them. And so that interview, I think, it's really sad to me to think that like that first interview they had pretty much told them that nobody was going to rescue them, nobody was going to save them. And that second interview was even more confirming to them that we're not going to say anything because we're going to get sent right back. Like we're going to be put right back in that home.
Yeah.
So of course they were out for 24 hours. I think they spent the night with my sister, and then within 24 hours they were back in my parents' home. And I learned later that they used people from the church to vouch for them, and they came up with some idea that they thought happened where it was like they were convinced that it was one of the older teens' friends that reported and just had it out for them. And so they'd come up with the story that they believed in. But I do remember my dad called me in Florida and he was mad. And my dad never really displayed anger, but he was angry. And he was like, whoever did this is going to pay. Like, this is not okay. Like, they're ruining our lives. And I almost think he had suspicions it was me. Like, he did have some suspicions it was me. And I think it was kind of like a half threat of like, if you did this, like, I'm going to find out kind of thing.
Right.
So
after this report is initially filed in 2000, and so this sat from 2017 to 2021, and then 2021, an older child in the home escaped the house essentially, which prompted you to again return to talking to OCS and state troopers. How quickly did things move from this child leaving the home to then there actually being action happening from law enforcement?
I believe it was like fall of 2020 when she was, she was born in 2001, then she was already, was already an adult. I think she was 19 when she got caught with a cell phone in the house. one of the other sisters that, was already an adult and married, not the one older than me, but the one adopted that's 12 years younger than me. She had helped her get a cell phone. And that was discovered by my mom in 2020 when she was 19. And that was like a huge blow up. Like she was super angry that she had a phone. And it just kind of led to a series of more abuse. But at one point, I was told that she took her out and was driving around erratically and made her think she was going to run her into a lake. Like there was just like a whole lot of things. And one of the instilling the fear things was that she had always made the kids scared of Native people and scared of anybody that was kind of like that my mom saw as a threat. She would make the children fearful. And, one of her big fears was the kids like reconnecting with their birth families and leaving her, abandoning her. So she made all of them terrified of Native people. And so there's like a bus stop downtown and it's a hub for people that come in from the villages. And what she did was she dropped her off down there and she said, you want to be independent? You want to live on your own? Like, go ahead. I'm going to leave you down here with these people. And I think she fully believed that she was going to find a way to call her. And so I think my mom dropped her off and then went driving around and then circled back to get her. And by that point, she had called our other sister and the other sister picked her up. And that's when she kind of was like out and free. And so she lived with my sister, I think, for a year, and she had been out for a year. And, I had talked to her and I had said, look, I know what you went through is not okay. And, at this point I was like, probably like 99% no contact with my mom. And the only reason I made contact with her was to check on the kids. But I had told her, I was like, I'm here for you. If you ever want to talk about it, I'm not going to make you talk about it, but I'm here for help if you ever want to. And so it took almost an entire year. And one day she called me and said, like, I need to talk. Like, I can't do this anymore. And so we went and sat down. And when she told me she wanted to talk, I thought she was going to say, like, I want to talk about one of my boyfriends or some drama that I'm having or something. But she was very like upfront with the abuse at that point. And she was like, I'm having flashbacks. I can't even live my life without having flashbacks and fear of these kids being killed in this home. And so she told me several stories of like flashbacks and things that she had gone through that would haunt her and torment her, and that she just couldn't handle it any longer. And she said, I can never live with myself if she kills one of these kids. And so that's when I supported her in going to the state troopers. She went in and we made a police report. She was shaking, crying, like she couldn't even hold a pen. Like I just helped her and supported her the best way that I could. And then at that point, I knew that I couldn't any longer. There's no way that I could not be upfront with my story. And so I sat down and I journaled probably like several pages worth. And I sent that in to law enforcement and I sent it in to Child Protective Services. And the next day I got a call from, I believe it was the attorney general that works for the state. And she asked me she said she read my story and she asked me if I would be willing to stand behind it. And, is this something that I would take an oath in court and actually, stand behind my story? And I said, absolutely. And so that was the day that the kids were taken from my mom. And at that point, she had already gotten wind of that there was going to be a removal, I believe, because she knew that the older girl was like, a factor that she didn't have control of. And, they had tried like dropping gifts off to her and they'd really tried to pull her back in. But I think what happened was I was really angry about it when I heard, but somebody from OCS read my report and immediately they sent an intake worker over to the house to talk to her and the kids. Like history was repeating itself. And I just was like, they don't know what they're dealing with. And then at that point, my other sister saw her driving down College Road. So the church is on this end of the road and her house is on this other end of the road, like a main road in town. And they saw her just busting it back from the church to her house to who knows what she was doing, hiding evidence, removing sticks or weapons or who knows what. But it was several hours later where they finally got troopers involved and they removed the kids from her. She was doing a meal for like the Reformers Unanimous meeting that night. And that's when they took 4 of the kids. The one that decided to stay, she was 16 and dug her heels in. And, she was kind of like one of the ones that our mom treated as like a golden child out of all of them. There was a different dynamic of abuse with all of them, but that was when she definitely treated better. And so she stayed and the other 4 were taken into protective custody.
So currently where this sits now, I mean, there's some public information that's come out that obviously scratches the surface of the overall abuse. But some of it echoes, I mean, similar experiences that you had growing up where, accusatory of touching themselves inappropriately, where your mom would say that. But this also led to physical abuse where she was, hitting the children for doing this. There was also mention of withholding food and water, which I think you indicated with some of your stories earlier. And then beatings with objects like slats from a bunk bed. Like that's a couple examples of the abuse that was experienced. And all of that right now has brought us back to where we started the episode, which is there's 13 felony charges currently. And I mean, we started talking about this, I think a year ago, where we had our initial phone call and conversation. And pretrial right now is scheduled for August 11th. But with the way the legal system works, hopefully that's the date that this actually happens and it's not delayed and move forward. But really right now it's just waiting and seeing where this goes from here. And, I think if anything is clear from our conversations, like the wheels of justice move super, super slowly. So as of right now, though, this is what we have. This is the information that's there, and hopefully we'll be able to regroup and talk a little bit more as this moves forward.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that justice will be done. I can't say I have a lot of faith in the justice system at this point. How I feel about it now is that I would love for my siblings for there to be a resolution for them, because I think that for them to get the message that what happened to them was not okay.
Yeah.
The way it was covered up by the church was not okay. Like I touched on the other podcasts where, the church bailed my mom out of jail and they sent around sign-up sheets saying all the kids were lying, and then finding out that they were a big part of them getting put back into that situation of abuse, and that 90% of those people would probably love to see them go back and have believed all the lies, and they don't believe the children. It's just horrible and disgusting, and it speaks into the dynamic of the church currently and all the abuse that we probably even have no idea about happening right there right now. And for justice to be done, and I don't feel like I have a personal investment in it anymore. I've come to a point where I have peace knowing that the kids are not going to be put back into that situation and that the kids are safe. But I think for my siblings' sake and for justice's sake, I would like to see there's something to be done, and for them to get the message like this wasn't okay. And this is, people who hurt children and abuse children and victimize them and use them for money, use them for their own personal gain. That's not going to be tolerated. And I don't know if that's what will happen, but I sincerely hope that something's done and that the kids at least get some kind of closure from this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I echo all of that, including the lack of faith in the justice system. But hopefully we have a good update here in about a month or so. And I appreciate you sharing so much. I know that it's not easy to go back and talk about all of this over and over and over again. And I think we spent probably 6-7 hours of time total talking about this. And I appreciate you being so willing to share. And hopefully we can have some positive updates here in the next couple months.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate you being willing to give time and attention to this story. And it definitely hasn't been easy. I think a big part of my healing has been to, my part of it, the there's an aspect here that involves my own children and them witnessing abuse, them being left with an abuser, them essentially being, I guess, abused by proxy in some ways. And it's been a very long process for our family to get away from that and to heal. And part of that has been me recognizing that I played a part, even though, yes, I was an abused child, I was still in such a toxic dynamic. And there was so much that came into play. I really had to look at the whole situation and work through my part of it and own my responsibility too. And so I think that that's kind of what holds a lot of people back, is like not wanting to face that guilt, not wanting to face that responsibility that they may play. But it's so important to report, and it's so important to tell the truth and not to hide predators. Like it's not okay on any level. You can't put a religious, tag on it and say, hey, we're just going to keep this quiet. Like, kids need to have a voice and they need to be advocated for.
I want to thank all of you so much for listening to this very important yet heavy episode. If you'd like to shed a further light on stories like this, be sure to share this episode, drop a comment, or send to someone that you think needs to hear it. As I mentioned at the top of the show, WikiLeaks' pretrial hearing is currently scheduled for August 11th. I'll be monitoring the situation very closely, and I'll share any updates as soon as I receive them. In the meantime, please consider going back and listening to my original 2 conversations with Hannah St. George. They shine an unprecedented light on the culture of Bible Baptist Church in Fairbanks, Alaska, and it gives us a look into her experiences growing up in a fundamentalist household. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Preacher Boys podcast. I'll see you in our next episode.